Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the MassINC Policy Center for our current event for this afternoon, talking about the Teach Western Mass case study. Just to give you a quick agenda on how things will be going today, we're going to have a welcome, then a presentation from one of our Greg Torres Senior Fellows about the case study, a panel discussion, Q&A, and then we'll close out with some next steps. Just to make sure everyone is fully oriented onto the Zoom, just to give a couple points of housekeeping. The chat is open for you all, especially because with webinars, we can't see each other. We definitely want to hear your feedback, your thoughts, and your sentiments about systems change in education. So feel free to use the chat to say hello to each other, or if you hear an aha moment while someone is speaking, please raise it in the chat. I know a lot of great information will come up as well. So please, if you have a question for our panelists throughout the event, feel free to put that in the Q&A box. That way, when we get to the Q&A session, we can address the questions at that time. Lastly, there is another component to make sure that we are engaging with you all during this event, which will be a couple poll questions that we'll be having to make sure that we're getting your input and your engagement through the conversation. So for one, I'm going to start one right now, just to know who's in the audience. So right now we have one up, just asking about what role best describes you. Feel free to select who you are or what option best represents you. So that way we kind of know who's joining us today. And I'll keep that open for a couple moments as we keep going. But it looks like we've got quite a bit of participation. We've got a lot of education folks, nonprofit leaders, some folks from research, funders and philanthropy, some policymakers. So really happy that you've joined us. I'll keep it open for a couple more seconds just to see who else is in the room. And thank you. So with that poll, I'm going to share the results here just so that way you know who's with us. It looks like we've got a lot of folks from the nonprofit space. So thank you for joining us. There will be a couple more polls throughout the event, so feel free to engage with those questions as we go along. But next, to get things going, I'm going to kick it off to Ben Foreman, the director of the MassINC Policy Center, to give us a quick welcome and hello as we get this conversation started. Ben?
Oh, thank you, Ayana, and good afternoon, everybody. It's my privilege to welcome you to the conversation from home, and most importantly, to introduce Pema Lacheng, our Greg Torres Senior Fellow. Pema really needs no introduction. I think everyone is familiar with the deep experience she gained in New York City that she brought to Western Massachusetts in the Pioneer Valley. Her work founding Teach Western Massachusetts, and the voice she has been for the entire state on issues around educator diversity and educator quality and effectiveness. I want to use my minute or two just to thank Pema for the work that she has done with us over the last 2 years. When we created the Greg Torres Senior Fellows Program 2 years ago to honor our Greg Torres, who I had the fortune to work with for almost 15 years. I think what really made Greg exceptional was being able to identify people who were really talented and driven and wanted to make the Commonwealth a better place and support them in every way that he could from the sidelines. And I think, that's what we hope to do with this program, is support leaders like Pema who really can change our Commonwealth for the better and make it a more equitable and inclusive Commonwealth for all. So, she really has set the standard in her 2 years in the inaugural cohort. She has spent so much time with us, making us smarter, working hard on this case study, thinking intersectionally and multidimensionally about the work that she's done and how it could benefit both the field of educator effectiveness, educator workforce, but also other areas of community change. So I really look forward to the conversation with you all today and hand it off now to Pema to share more about her work in the case study. Um, Thank you, Pema.
Thank you, Ben. That was a lovely introduction. I just want to say thank you so much to you, Ben, to Ayana, to Maeve, to Joe, and everyone at MassINC. This has been a wonderful, almost 2-year experience in this senior fellowship. And I'm very happy to say good afternoon to everyone. And thank you for joining the conversation today. And we're going to talk about the vision for the future, that where everyone thrives and experiences joy and success. That is my North Star for everything that I do, and I know so many of us do as well. I am going to start by presenting a brief overview of the case study. And I say brief because it is there on the website and you can go and find the more details. But I want to ground this panel conversation in this lived experience, in this example. And I'm very excited that we're going to be talking to the panelists later in a few short minutes. So yes, thank you, Ayana. Together, we can ensure a quality, diverse, and representative teacher workforce for the benefit of every student in the Commonwealth and also beyond. I know we have some audience members from beyond Massachusetts as well. And I think a lot of us know this, but I think it's worth taking a little bit of time to really talk about the importance of teacher diversity. There's a lot of research about why it's so important, and we can see that on our next few slides. And yeah, so teacher diversity improves student outcomes, it reduces discipline, it increases engagement, there's higher expectation, there's a social and emotional positive impact. And this is something that benefits all students, not just students of color. There's also system-wide advantages as well. And there's a beautiful context right now. We have had a decade of work here in Massachusetts working on increasing the quantity, quality, and diversity of the teacher workforce. And there have been wonderful gains. And that I think is important for us to all acknowledge in this space, is that there have been improvements. It is a stated goal by DESE, the State Education Department, and the governor and the administration to increase the teacher workforce to 25% teacher diversity by 2030. And we are hovering around 10%, which is an increase from the past. There's a lot of reports out there, like the MassINC in Pursuit of Greatness. There's the Latino for Education, Educator Diversity Act, which Magdalia can speak about during the panel time. And there's a lot of different initiatives and nonprofits that have been working on this, schools, districts, really a wide group of people, like the Diverse Teacher Workforce Coalition of Western Mass. And so I'm really excited that we are bringing this back up to the surface because it's so important. And there has been a slight decrease in the past year in the number of teachers of color. And so we want to make sure we keep talking about this topic. Ayana, can we jump to the data slides? And I can send all these slides at another time as well to everyone for reference. Thank you. Okay, so this is some data that MassINC analyzed. And so if you'll see, these are some of the gains, the important accomplishments over the past 10 or so years. Teachers of color as a share of new hires in Massachusetts have gone from 2012 to 2022 from 9% to 18%, which means that the hiring new workforce is more diverse than the current workforce, which is a positive trend. And then moving forward, we also have, unfortunately, there's still a gap in the next slide. As the student population is diversifying faster than the teacher workforce, the gap is projected to increase. So this is something that continues to be important for all of us. And then moving forward to the next slide, this is a quick snapshot of the urban districts in Massachusetts. This is all from the report in Pursuit of Greatness and where the gap is by region. And then last little data slide here is where we are. Now this 2023 is a few years old, but the data is slightly old. And this is where we are currently a little bit stagnated in terms of percentage. And so this is all to say this is an important topic. And here we go talking about Teach Western Mass briefly. Okay, so mission and vision. Teach Western Mass is a wonderful organization that I worked at for 9 or 10 years. And they're doing great work recruiting, preparing, and supporting teachers, teachers of color, quantity, quality, and diversity, everyone. And so what is a small nonprofit? Just a brief overview. 2016, they were founded. They work in Springfield and Holyoke. There was a severe staffing shortage. This oftentimes happens in gateway cities or schools that are experiencing turnaround or sort of school reform efforts. And so there was a real emphasis on systems change and improving the teacher talent workforce at the time in 2016. And that's where Teach Western Mass was born. So we can go to the next few slides. Yep, roughly 1 in 3 teachers left annually. And what happens then is, they call it the filling the bucket sort of metaphor, where because they're hiring inexperienced new teachers who are unlicensed, then those teachers don't persist at the same rate as maybe a more trained and supported teacher. And so then they're having to continue to hire over and over. And this is a situation that is very prevalent in gateway type cities or things like that that are not so true in suburban or more affluent districts. And so it's this long-standing problem that Teach Western Mass was created to solve. In addition, teacher diversity, huge issue, was really needed, and the quantity, quality, and diversity. And so this lack of teacher diversity and mismatch between the student population and the teacher population. This is really the problem that was Teach Western Mass was founded on. Okay, quick little timeline. Founded in 2016. We started a residency, which is an alternative teacher prep program. In 2018, the Teach Western Mass residency. Ashanta is here. She is an alum, an amazing teacher. She can speak to that. And we had 2 strategic plan shifts based on various things. And then I left in 2025, and the organization is doing well beyond my leadership, which is wonderful. And then next slide. Yep, we worked really hard with many of these people on the call and in others, Diverse Teacher Workforce Coalition, universities, community organizations, foundations, funders, teachers, school districts. It really was a shared regional narrative work for all of us to really think through what was needed for our students and our communities, and how we could all, put our differences aside and find a shared vision around a high quality, diverse teacher workforce. And it was some of our schools doubled their teacher diversity in 10 years. Their prep programs doubled their figures. There was huge sort of gains in Western Mass using these type of collaborative models. Okay, moving on. How am I for time? Okay, not too bad. So we made a lot of strategic decisions and adaptations. That is what you do. We're going to do next slide, if you don't mind. Thank you. Because of the changing thing, we had the pandemic, we had market forces, different shifts, including the way that teachers were allowed to be licensed using this emergency waiver changed. So there were a lot of outside forces that we were navigating and still trying to stay true to our mission, which is so important, right? No matter what, but a very small nonprofit at the same time. I'm really proud of the accomplishments we did. I know we made a huge impact. It's a great success story, but even so, there were barriers and there were limitations, and there were many things for us to discuss and learn. And next slide, let's see, 4 key takeaways. This is what the case study talks about. Relationship management matters. Relationships are everything. Capacity, culture and sustainability, and ecosystem support. That is basically the themes of what I was just speaking about. And then a note on equity in the next slide. Didn't come in thinking about diversity in 2016. That wasn't the stated mission when I was hired, but it was such an essential piece of everything we do. It can't be an add-on. It has to really be embedded into all we do. And I know so many people have that shared understanding and belief. And so we had some specific sub-programs that we developed over the years, like the Black Fellowship and an AmeriCorps program to support that, which is talked about more in the case study. Okay, moving on. What's next? We'll shift. I said that slide. Okay, so we're here today to talk about all of the case study and other organizations that are similar in some ways, what can be learned from our successes and some of our constraints about regional workforce intermediaries. And if we don't call them that, we can also just call them, they're small nonprofits that function from a systems lens approach in order to tackle persistent staffing and equity gaps. What are the lessons learned from Massachusetts, other regions, maybe even other states? And what, supports for leadership, infrastructure, policy alignment are essential for long-term change. I think the Teach Western Mass story offers a powerful case for intentional resource systems change around this work. This work can be done well when we all come together to do it and have that shared vision. So I'm really excited to start to talk about some of those things. Thank you for your time around the case study. We are going to introduce our panel, who I'm very excited that you all get to speak to. We have Ashanta Esther, who's the Teach West. Oh, we're going to start with Migdalia. No, go for it. Go for it. So we have the amazing Migdalia Diaz, which I'm so excited that she's here to speak to you all because she has so much experience and knowledge. She's the Chief Operating Officer of Latinos for Education, and she's also currently the interim ED for the Massachusetts regional organization, part of Latinos for Education. And she brings a wealth of knowledge. We also have, next slide, Ashanta Esther, who is the TWM. She's a residency alum from cohort 6. And so she can speak to her experience in our teacher prep program. And she's also an amazing special ed teacher currently in Holyoke Public Schools. She has an amazing science background from Elms College and Smith College. And so she can bring the classroom perspective today. We also have Nadia Hardin, Chief of Staff of the New Commonwealth Fund, which is a wonderful philanthropic organization focused on equity and really trying to bring resources to really important topics and initiatives in the Commonwealth. So I'm really excited she's here today to speak to some of the funder perspective. And next up we have, yes, Paulina. Yes, I'm very excited that she's here as well. Executive Director of Great Schools Partnership, does really great work across New England and can really speak to some great examples during our panel session. Okay, shifting to the panel. Do we want to do a poll, Ayana? Transition? Yeah. Okay, let me introduce the topic while we run this poll here. Okay, so I think we all know this, but I'm going to reintroduce the topic here. Across the country, oh yes, here we go. We have a poll if everybody wants to participate in that. Who should primarily lead regional educator workforce strategy? No wrong answers here. This is my teacher self coming through here. No wrong answers. This is just a little bit of a feel of what people think before we start the panel. Who do we think should be the primary leader of this type of work? And we'll leave the panel open for a minute or so, and then we can see the results. Thank you all. Okay, across the country and locally in Massachusetts, we are asking schools to solve educator workforce inequities like recruitment, preparation, retention, diversity, often within systems that were never designed for coordination at regional scale. We are working within systems that were designed for the old way of being. The case study that we just spoke about, the Teach Western Mass case study from MassINC Policy Center, highlights some of this shift, that small nonprofits serve as a regional systemic leader, an intermediary, you could call it. helping align districts, higher education, policymakers, funders, and educators around shared workforce challenges. This could be true even if you took a topic that was not workforce, but it's the same idea. So this shift raises important questions. What does it actually take for a nonprofit to maintain systems leadership? How is that different from maybe just running a program? What capacities like governance, funding, credibility are required? And what tensions emerge when a small organization holds regional influence? And perhaps most importantly, should nonprofits play this role at all, or are they filling gaps that public systems should own? Today's conversation sits at this intersection of policy, practice, and philanthropy. And we're going to explore both the promise and the pressure points of this intermediary model and what lessons might be transferable from Western Mass and beyond. So I'm very excited that we have our panelists here today. We're going to start by grounding this conversation in lived experience. And we are going to ask Ashanta the question first, if that's okay. Oh, yes, panelists, we can turn on our cameras. Yes, wonderful. We have a lovely chat going. I love this. Yes. Okay. So Shanta, you're up first, classroom teacher, want to elevate your voice. So starting off, when you think about why you entered teaching and why you've stayed, what has Teach Western Mass done that has helped you? And any other perspective you would like to provide about your teaching journey?
Well, thank you for the question. When I entered teaching, my why was rooted in commitment to students who deserve more than just a teacher who stays, which shouldn't be the bar. They deserve a relentless advocate. My mission is to ensure that students with special needs are never boxed into their label, but rather seen for their unique skills and potential. I stay because of my deep commitment to these students and their family, despite the exhaustion that comes with constant advocacy. I refuse to walk away from my community and the program that I worked so hard to build. My goal was to move beyond simply meeting baseline needs for my students. I'm focused on reshaping the program to bridge gaps between special education and general education, fostering self-sufficient students that are able to succeed independently. Would Teach Western Mass being instrumental in my journey for that. As a non-traditional educator, as you guys seen with all of my science background, and the only Black teacher in my program, TWM provided me with a vital safe space and the professional skills to challenge the status quo without fear of being labeled difficult or complacent. They taught me to leverage data, not just for compliance, but as a strategic tool for inclusion. By aligning my student growth with that of the general education peers, I can ensure that they are never excluded from the conversation. This data-driven evidence of their success is exactly what I need to never stop championing my students. So with Teach Western Mass, I was able to get that confidence. I had that support system, and the backing to know that what I was advocating for was not something out of the blue, that there was strong data behind it, that we need people like me for our students.
I love that. Thank you so much, Ashanta. Thank you for your answer. We are going to do another question. Each of you can take a moment and introduce yourself again if you would like. And really, this is a question for all panelists. What does regional intermediary actually mean in practice? Like, what does that mean to you? Who would like to start? How about Migdalia? Can I put you on the spot?
Sure. Um, it's a really great question. I think in the context of, we last year had a great success after 4 years, got the Educator Diversity Act passed, and our role in that was really maybe not as traditional as an intermediary, but we really wanted to serve as a 501(c)(3) as the backbone for all the efforts in terms of galvanizing this group of people that we have on our Educator Diversity Coalition and working with legislators and with the community to get a bill passed, right? Knowing that this bill wasn't going to solve all the problems and it probably wasn't going to look exactly as how we originally drafted it. But it was really this just shepherding of this bill and all of the things that came with it, which required a lot more on the policy and advocacy side in terms of, how we engage with people, but also how we galvanize and move our community to support that. So it honestly shifted a lot in terms of like how we had to operate as we got further into it. But it was really, we were really shepherding this effort forward in a real collaborative spirit with this coalition that we had put together.
Yes, the EDA was so important. And I put a link in the chat in case somebody doesn't know what that is. There's a great way to join that movement and the implementation that's happening next. Paulina, Nadia, anyone wants to go next?
I can jump in next. Good to see everybody. I'm Paulina with Great Schools Partnership. We're a regional nonprofit, as Pema referenced. We're really focused in our mission on supporting, collaborating with educators and communities across the 6 states with a focus on equity in education and excellence for all students. With that, one of the pieces that really resonated just in listening to the opening and then again in listening to Migdalia is our role as facilitator and as capacity builder and almost as container. So if we are doing our work at our highest level and at our sort of best work, we're not always the ones that are out in front with our brand plastered. We're often behind the scenes, helping build capacity, helping facilitate, helping seed strength and skill in a local community so that we ultimately are stepping away and building that very local context, which really matters. And I think for me, that's been something that prior to joining Great Schools Partnership, I worked with the Breakthrough Collaborative and the Breakthrough site in Boston, which is very local and very direct service and very programmatic to like one specific context. And I think that's an important role for nonprofits to play, but it's really different than that regional capacity builder. And both are important. One is probably a little bit harder to measure and fundraise for. But I think that's often how I see our role in that regional capacity is almost like a servant leadership, a behind the scenes capacity builder.
Great. I can hop in really briefly. Good afternoon, everyone. Nadia Harden. I'm, as mentioned, with the New Commonwealth Fund. A very small bit of background on us. We are a philanthropic organization that was founded in 2020, primarily looking to fund Black and Latino-led nonprofit organizations across the Commonwealth, really with the idea of hoping to close a funding gap to organizations that are historically led by Black and Latino leaders. I think as far as we are concerned at NCF, the way we would think about ourselves as an intermediary is kind of similar to what Paulina just shared around Great School Partnerships, really as a convener, creating space for organizations to come together and think about what co-designing solutions looks like, and then also providing them with the opportunity to say, okay, this is what we need from a capacity perspective. How can we as NCF support them in getting the tools that they need to be able to do their work on a daily basis? It's really more about convening those stakeholders, supporting that shared learning model, and helping leaders to navigate these systems that we all know have been super opaque and challenging to access and extremely fragmented. And so whatever we can do to support leaders having those conversations with one another to make the solutions more targeted, that's, I think, how we view ourselves as an intermediary.
That's great. Thank you both, Paulina and Nadia. Since we had you, Nadia, we'll ask a question towards you again. This is bringing up for me what you all are saying. Systems change. You can be, as an organization, nonprofit, more in the background, less front and center, like you both just said, examples of. But systems change can also be sort of long-term or maybe sometimes messy. How do you make sense of and talk about and justify investing in work where the outcomes can be, more diffuse or, maybe there's collaboration and, attribution is a little bit shared. So how do we do some of that measurement work and that communication work when it isn't so simple as just here's a program, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's met its outcomes, and it's helping these people, which is important. But this type of work is different in many ways as we're speaking about. And so, if you could just speak a little bit about that from the funder perspective, Nadia, I know your work is very intentional.
Absolutely. So our funding model, I think different than some other philanthropic organizations, is really actually focused on not just the systems level work, but also thinking about the leader. And so we're looking not necessarily always just at the program and how strong the results or outcomes are for a particular program, but how are we actually supporting a leader and changing their leadership experience? And so I think that is what's most important for us, even as we are thinking about like these maybe like more longitudinal outcomes that systems level work typically requires. If we can go to a cohort that we've been working with or a group of leaders and have a conversation with them, and they're able to express to us that they feel better and more equipped to show up to continue to be in this long-term systems level change work, which we all know can be exhausting as an organizational leader, then we feel we've been doing our job, right? The other ways that we think about success is making sure that leaders have access to funding that is not super prescriptive, right? Like general operating is super, super important for nonprofit organizations to be able to be flexible with the way that they're spending their dollars, as well as we try our best to be able to operate in a space of multi-year commitments as well. And I think if we can make sure that leaders are well resourced and that they also have beyond just financial investment, access to sometimes it's just like communities of care that make sure that they're able to be able to show up as their best selves in the systems level work. That's success for us, even if like the bill doesn't get passed at the end of the day.
Communities of care. Yes, yes. I hear a lot of relational threads and themes there too, and trust and care. That's an important word from philanthropy. Thank you. So to the two EDs, COOs, Paulina and Migdalia, if you want to speak to anything that Nadia said around examples you have, from your experiences around this type of work, that would be wonderful.
Do you want to go first, Migdalia, or do you want me to? All right, sure, I can jump in. Nadia, I was just listening, being like, yes, I want to join a community of care. That sounds great. I appreciate the question, Pema, around measurement. I think that's something that I lose sleep over, that I'm often thinking deeply about. One of the pieces of work that we lead at Great Schools Partnership is around our Diversifying the Educator Workforce Collaborative. And I want to shout out Glenise Sanchez, who's actually on the call today, who really was one of the leaders at Great Schools Partnership who helped to grow that work and worked closely with the Bar Foundation as we were kicking that off across the region. One of the pieces that we think really deeply about, because we believe that this intermediary connecting, cross-pollinating role is really critical and important to systems change work. And it's hard to measure, but not impossible to measure. And so we're often trying to think about what's the big systems change goal that we might expect to see 5 years out, 10 years out, 20 years out, and then what are the year by year look fors? And how can we really tie those to the research? So an example, when we're thinking about diversifying the educator workforce, we might lean on research that really speaks to the impact that mentorship can have on retention for educators of color in years 1 through 5. And so as we're supporting initiatives around that work, as we're building connections, that research is really pushing us to make suggestions, to drive programs. We have look-fors that might come to us through surveys, through short-term retention numbers, through overall impact on school culture. And then those we think will ultimately kind of the theory of action that those will tie out to these longer systems level change pieces. And it's hard. It's not perfect. I think a lot of what we see that's qualitative feedback, it's important for us to lean into that. I really appreciated your opening with the case study, because in some ways that allows you to get a much more in-depth sense of what's working, what's not working beyond just a quantitative data point. I'll pass it to Magdalia next.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Measurement. That is always probably one of the most challenging things, especially in light of, the work that we do. We have several programs where we are working with early career teachers and later career teachers and with families. And while we are able to see and kind of measure certain advances that those individuals make, so the idea is that we get educators of color to stay, right, and to feel like they have the kind of support that they need to advocate for the needs of their students and the families that they families in our community. And sometimes, as we are kind of training these folks and giving this, they don't necessarily stay in that role, but they do advance in kind of the education realm. And so sometimes those things are a little hard to track because it relies on those individuals coming back and letting us know where they are and what they're doing. But I think the most visible thing we've been able to see, so for example, we have a program that works with families directly, is we have been able to see tangible results where those families are starting to get involved in school committees. And their biggest barrier was language. And so we're helping them find solutions to that or working with the districts to be able to provide translators so that they can really listen to the voices of these teachers, these family members, not just in the realm of like, we usually bring them into a room together in our programs, but having access to that kind of feedback from the parent community throughout, the different committees that these folks can join. So there are things like that are a little bit easier to track, and then there are some that are a little bit more difficult to track. So that's always kind of the quandary of just figuring out like how do we best show, how we advance. So it's always a little bit of a puzzle that we're trying to put together. But there's obviously with legislation, it's one thing, but it's in terms of like advancement of individuals, in terms of being able to better support our community, that's a little bit harder. But it's something that we're always kind of focused on figuring out how to best represent.
Thank you both for your answers. This is making me think, and Ashanta, I'm going to ask you a question next. One of the things I know for myself, when I was at Teach Western Mass, is I did feel oftentimes like I had a stakeholder everywhere in every which way. I almost felt like a wagon wheel, and there was like the funders and the community and the teachers and the schools and my staff and everybody. And that is a beautiful thing, Desi. But it's also, a lot to navigate, especially when you're trying to make sure you show up for everyone in all fronts and in all ways. And you're moving not just the quality of your program forward, but the system itself. And so that's can feel like a heavy load. And something that was so important to me as a former teacher, as an educator, as an organization that, served teachers and many people on this call as well. What makes an organization credible to teachers? Like, what undermines that credibility from the classroom perspective, Ashanta, or anything you'd like to speak to from your experience? Like, what were the good things about working with organizations and what, maybe felt hard? Like, it's okay to talk about some of the tensions too.
I would say, in the eyes of a teacher, for a program to be credible, we really look for approximate leadership. Some people who are not like far removed from like the everyday struggles that teachers have within the classroom, and they understand human connection and not just like the pedagogy. I know a second one was for them to have relational transparency. So when they like foster a safe space, like when we talked about the affinity groups that I really loved at TWM, they empowered us to be bold, to take pedagogical risk, to advocate firstly for our students with needs, and they trust us to do what we need to do, but it was also backed by tangible resources. Support wasn't just like sentimental, it was a toolkit. Um, and that's why it was easy for us, I know in my cohort, to like follow a program in the teaching of teacher Western Mass because they made sure like we felt that within the program. I would say on the flip side, credibility can be lost if they choose to silence your voices and just focus on the partnership that they had with the district. I know that would have put a big split between us. When teachers' voices are sidelined and you're just here to meet the administrative bottom line, um, it really just draws a disconnect and there's like no follow through on the promises that, we sign up for, and it kind of breaks the professional bond. And you can ask teachers to be the architect for students' future, but you all can't take away their voices um, when they need that as a tool to do that for students.
I love that. Thank you so much. Nadia, I'm going to ask you a question. From, the funder perspective, if you could speak to, funders sit in a powerful, position. But so intermediaries, regional organizations can also, coalesce a lot of power. And so how do you avoid becoming sort of the de facto agenda setter in a regional strategy or something similar, in your experience? How do you balance that tension between power and also results?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult as a funder to walk into a group of organizational leaders who are many times dependent on philanthropy to run their operations and say to them, let's just break down this power structure. Like, I'm a human and you're a human, and we can have a shared conversation where we're trying to create this safe space for you to raise your hand and say, like, this is the thing I actually don't know, and this is the thing I need help with. And as much as my lived experience can show up in those spaces, like, I'm still in a position of power in terms of being a funder and writing a check. So it's really difficult. We actually, when we first started designing NCF and the programming and our grant making strategy and our impact measurement strategy, we were originally founded with the idea and the mission that we were going to disrupt and dismantle systemic racism. And we all sat back and said, well, how the heck are we going to measure whether or not we've disrupted and dismantled systemic racism as a funder? That seems really complicated and hard. And so we went to 20 nonprofit leaders who, some of them were in our portfolio at the time, others were not. And we sat down with them and they said, first, help us define what systemic racism actually looks like. And second, what does that look like when it's removed? And you tell us as leaders, what success actually looks like. And I think that piece right there was really different as a funder from anecdotally from the people who participated in this design process. There are not many opportunities where a funder says to you, you tell us what your success looks like. And I think that level of code design is what's been able to help us think about and honestly, quite frankly, build a brand around this idea that we are in it with organizations, not there to dictate what their daily programmatic work should look like. And quite frankly, how they're staffing and leading their organizations. We are there to support them because they have proximity to the challenges that they're trying to solve best. But it has taken time for that to happen and stick. Even in that co-design process, we were developing this metric and this tool, and one of the participants said, okay, so if we score XYZ, does that mean we will get funding or we won't get funding? And we're still the funder in the room, and we're saying, actually, no, you don't tell us that, this is not how that works, right? We're still co-designing and we're not at the place we're actually applying the tool yet. So it's a challenge, but we've worked to really be intentional about co-designing things with people.
Thank you, Nadia. Paulina and then Migdalia, I'm hearing some themes of relationships and how we balance, power when you sit in the middle between sort of the top and the bottom. So, and, not that either one is better, but they're just there. So there's grassroots, grass tops. How do you ensure, what are some examples of ways that you and your organization have, done that balance, in terms of making sure that there's a co-design to the way that Nadia is speaking to that. I love that example from the funder perspective. So I'd love some examples of a similar related sort of idea from y'all's viewpoint.
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to share. we struggle with that conversation all the time, right? So we have had funders that have come by and they want us to do a particular thing that really kind of takes us a little far out of the scope of what we're trying to achieve. And we've had to say, that's an amazing thing. And also, like, it would actually be really disruptive to our operations to do that, right? So we've had to kind of say no in certain cases. And then we have some amazing funders who come in and say, great, we're on the same page and let's talk about like how we design this together in a way that's going to be most effective, right? And there's different variations of that. And that has been the best is when we're able to kind of sit down and say, this is what we're aiming to do. And often that has led to, hey, have you talked to like this other group that could be kind of helpful in that vein? But that has been probably the most beautiful thing is when we get funders that kind of get it. We had a funder who partnered with us when we were working on early college work, and that the results of that has been amazing. And being able to kind of work also with, districts and with community colleges as well, in the service of that grant, which is where our focus was at that time. And that was a real partnership of just designing and kind of co-designing. And as we learned along the way, being able to kind of go back and say, here's what we're discovering, and their ability to shift with us was really incredible.
I think I might add to just the story that Nadia shared to sort of kick us off of those nonprofits in the room, sort of already being in as partners in that co-design space. The idea of humility and sort of the continual asking of who's not in the room, that I would imagine that many of those nonprofit leaders also thought, like, how do we bring the voices from local communities in? How do we make sure we're talking to students and families and bringing that perspective in is critical to sit in this spot. An example that comes to mind for me of some of our work at Great Schools Partnership, and I'll put it in the chat. A number of years ago, we had the privilege of working with Springfield Public Schools. So in that Western Mass area around their Portrait of a Graduate, their strategic plan, and then the ongoing implementation of that. And in that, we were really working in sort of a facilitator mode to help lift the surveys, the focus groups, gathering community voice, running the data, providing some coaching to the district leaders, but really working for the ultimate products to be facing forward and specific to that community with Great Schools Partnership in the background. Then on the other side of it, sort of if you think of us in the middle, there's the funder who's providing the funding for that project overall, that's going to us as a nonprofit and to the district. And a piece that a nonprofit or a regional intermediary can often play is having the space capacity to write the grants, to do the reporting, to have that umbrella view of the data, to think about how that story compares to another story in another state. So being able to kind of lift that and be the go-between from funders and community level, I think is also another important work that often these intermediary organizations can hold and that can help support.
Thank you both for those examples. We're going to do another quick little poll just to get a read on what people think. Again, no wrong answers, just where you are right now, audience. What do you think is the biggest barrier to regional systems change? I love all the comments and opinions going on in the chat. Keep going. We'll leave the poll open briefly and then we'll show the results. And we're going to shift. And Ashanta, I'll ask you a question. If another region in Massachusetts or another state wanted to replicate this type of model, whether it's Teach Western Mass or something like it, what would you think that they should prioritize to truly support teachers? What else lessons do you have for people who are trying to bring this work into the future and create the vision that we all want?
While we know like every region faces unique challenges, there are universal pillars of support that every district should replicate to prioritize teachers. We can start with leadership alignment. A teacher's success shouldn't just depend on a single point person. It requires a clear, collaborative rapport with the principals. When school leadership is truly invested, like in the residency model, there's great teacher development as a priority, and that's what it's treated as, and not just a luxury. Um, when I went through the cohort, often we seen that residents' experience was compromised because of building-wide staffing gaps. And many in the cohort were frequently pulled from their own classrooms to substitute, forcing them to practice outside of their licensure area. And this created a necessary hurdle for them in completing like the requirements, like the CAP and observations, which were like essential task for the teachers to get done. So it's like essentially having a teacher build a plane and then taking away the tools mid-flight for them. When we addressed like this pipeline, the biggest thing was financial sustainability. I was fortunate that my district covered my cohort costs. Um, but then I seen that support dwindle to only a portion for the following year. So even though you're guaranteed licensure, like the committed teachers to stay in the district with you, it was kind of short-sighted, in my opinion, by the district to cut that funding by making it a fluctuation in the budget line versus like a set negotiable investment for the stability of the school. And I feel like when we te continue to teach treat teachers as that gain as like an option, we really kind of go back into this model where we are in that full circle, having it just not plausible for us to make it sustainable basically. So I would say that if another region wants to replicate this model, making sure it's in your bottom line for teachers to be able to fulfill this program and not just collaborate with a district point person, but make sure that you're investing in these principles so that the teachers have what they need so that this is treated as a priority.
Thank you so much for that wonderful answer. We are going to shift into the Q&A portion. So if you have put any questions you have in the chat or the Q&A feature, that's wonderful. We also have some questions that were asked ahead of time that we can reference as well. And in case anybody does jump off shortly after one, we do also have a survey and some closing next steps. So I hope that everyone gets to that as well. So first question. Ooh, let's take this from Glennis. Sharing a question to the panel. In this moment of constrained resources, what funding models and partnerships do you see showing the most promise for protecting educator diversity work rather than scaling back? Excellent question. Anybody is welcome to take that. I can drop it into the chat again too.
I can start with what we've been seeing in our work around this at Great Schools Partnership, but I'll also hope that somebody will answer this more thoroughly, and then I can take their answer and use it, because this is a significant challenge for us. I would say not only the shift in constrained resources from funding, but also the political context and a lot of the fear and racism that we see from our own government, from districts, has put a real pressure on this work. And so the two things that come to mind for me are one, as you said at the start, Pema, leaning into that relationship management of who are those long-term partners, funders who you're not doing a dance to sell something, but they're in it as partners and saying like, we know this need exists. Let's work together to co-design and help meet that need. That feels critical. And so maintaining those strong partnerships matters. And then two, in other contexts, because we want this work to also move in red states and in conservative communities and with school boards who may oppose it, those educators and students still deserve that work. So also thinking about how you can more deeply ground in the research that very clearly shows the positive impact on student learning of having a skilled and diverse workforce. That it's not one or the other, that both of those things coexist, and that sharing that research and really being able to ground in that data can often help to shift that work in more conservative communities. And with that said, we've seen some funding drop in this past year as a result. So I'm hoping someone else has the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's a great answer in terms of shifting funding models, because honestly, that requires a really long runway. We have looked a lot about, shifting funding models and just what that would actually take. It's not as quick in order to, it's really hard. It doesn't give you any kind of like short-term dexterity to shift to a different funding model, at least not what we've found. Instead, I think to what Paulina spoke to, we've looked at basically leveraging the relationships that we have, strengthening those relationships. In the environment that we're currently in, we have to think about like how we phrase things about what we're doing. And depending on where we're in, we are also in other states where we've had to shift our language in terms of how we talk about the benefits of educator diversity and what that means more so from a workforce lens, because it has a huge impact in terms of like workforce pipeline. So it's really been leveraging relationships with existing funders, making sure that we are also talking to partners. So we have we have a broad network of folks who some are in the education space and are just doing different aspects of the work. Some are outside of the education space, but somehow the work still connects, and figuring out ways that we can work together in terms of being able to continue to advance the work, so that we can, in a time where funders are necessarily not as generous or they're just a little bit more cautious, that we can be really diligent about making sure that we are cautious about how we're spending money and what we're doing, but still able to push the work forward. So it requires a little bit of creativity and collaboration.
Yeah, I would just add, like, double click on that point, Migdalia, that the idea of nonprofit organizations working together rather than reinventing the wheel or doing a little bit of this work over here as one organization and a little bit of this work over here. Like, I think many times we see organizations that are serving similar missions and maybe have similar programming, and it's almost creating like an unnecessary competitive landscape, that you're all going for the same dollars. And so even some success stories I've seen have ended up in thinking about some mergers or acquisitions within the nonprofit space, which is really real and actually sometimes a useful tool to think about how you're creating a smaller landscape for accessing those dollars, but still, to your point, pushing that work forward and making sure that you still have the capacity to be able to reach your audiences successfully.
Those are great answers. And I know we don't have a direct, government representative on the panel, but I know some of us have worked in different government positions. And so I know there are a lot of initiatives right now with workforce development, because we have some questions about that, apprenticeship and sort of different ways that we can get, government dollars and government programs and policies to support some of these systematic issues. And I really do feel, that we need to go sort of in this collaborative approach of how do we get, public dollar funding, whether it's through these like apprenticeship type work, and braid that together. I had a question in the chat about funding, and braiding funding is kind of where oftentimes we find some success. And so we are going to close out unless we see some other questions in the chat. This is a continued conversation. We're going to, keep talking about this. I hope that everyone who attended got some valuable ideas about how to bring this back to your region and your work and continue elevating teacher diversity and systemic educational equity change. Really huge shout out to our amazing panelists, Migdalia, Ashante, Nadia, Paulina. Thank you everyone for attending. There is a evaluation tool. How do we get to that, Ayana? If everyone could please just quickly, thank you, share your feedback about today's event so we can continue to learn and grow and get better. And we will continue this conversation. And I really just want to thank MassINC for the wonderful platform and experience of this event and this fellowship. And there's the evaluation form. So please don't leave without clicking on that first, and answering a few quick questions. And I hope no one has to shovel too much. Thank you all. Thank you for everyone in the chat saying thank you. And huge shout out to our panelists. Shantae is on her lunch break from teaching, so good luck in your afternoon classes. And goodbye, everyone. Thank you.